Hi everyone, welcome to the Death Chicks. We're very happy to be here. Sorry for the technical difficulties and the late start. We have Dr. Jordan Grumet here with us. As the Death Chicks, we try to bring in a variety of people to talk about death, dying, grief, and loss. We are sharing a different perspective. We're bringing light to loss. And we're hopefully, our big goals are to make this traditionally uncomfortable topic something that people feel more at ease with, something they're comfortable in discussing with their loved ones and their family, something they're more informed about. Often when we fear things such as death, we're afraid to talk about it. We're going to have a great discussion today with a doctor who's been there and who's seen it and who shares a heart-based perspective. And from this discussion, we hope that you'll learn a bit about something that you may encounter one day with a loved one, as we all will. So thank you, Jordan, for joining us today. I'm going to hand it over to Patty now, who will do a more formal introduction of our guest.
Very good. Thanks, Misty. I'm glad we're here. It's been kind of a bumpy road, but we made it, and we're thrilled to have Dr. Jordan Grumet with us today. Now, I got to ask you a question. How many of you have a doctor who really, really listens to you? Listens to you not only for your physical concerns, your emotional concerns, and maybe even your spiritual concerns. And that may be a very rhetorical question because I've talked with a lot of people, and most people say, you know what, I feel rushed through. I don't even really go to the doctor that often. It's one of those things that seems to be universal, and I hope by someone like Jordan Grumet, a doctor who is in private practice in Northbrook, Illinois, I hope because of your presence and because of what you're putting out there in the world, Jordan, that things are changing. So here we have a doctor who is very willing to have a conversation about death. And why this is important to me, Jordan, is because I've been in the hospice industry, and it's probably not the norm. Although all of the people in the hospice industry are very well intended, we don't tend to see doctors having those kinds of discussions about death, dying, about comfort care versus curative when those kinds of options are exhausted. So I am thrilled to have Dr. Grumet with us today. Is it okay to call you Jordan? Can we be informal like that?
Yes, of course.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Well, we're thrilled to have you. Thanks for hanging in there with us. I want to share just a little bit more about you and to give kind of sort of a foundation. So obviously you can tell that Dr. Grumet is young and vibrant, and he doesn't present like that 1940s doctor, as we said on the write-up here, even though you've got that same sensibility that we can talk with you. And basically what I know about you from not only your writings but hearing about you is that many times you're doing what's right rather than what's proficient in terms of time, and maybe even giving up your own time, your own family time to do this. And so as we head into the show and learn more about you, I know you and I talked pre-show about your writing and the fact that you're a doctor writing about things that most people won't even admit to, let alone share. So you and I thought that might be a great, or you had mentioned you thought it might be a great idea to kind of set the tone with a short blurb from your writing. And if you'd be so kind, we'd love to have you read that for us to open the show.
Sure. Just to talk about the piece a little bit, what I found is that I have lots of conversations with patients about end of life. And we get to almost a tipping point where sometimes our medical treatments actually do more harm than good. And that's a point where talking about hospice and palliative care is really important. So I wrote this piece almost as a description of the kind of talk I try to have with my patients to try to comfort them and explain that going with comfort care or palliative care or hospice, depending on where you are, is not necessarily giving up. It's just a different way of looking at the care that you're going to receive over the next period of time. So the name of this piece is Death is a Period Occurring at the End of a Sentence. It's actually part of my newly released book, I Am Your Doctor and This Is My Humble Opinion.
I love the title, by the way. That's great. And we do have a link And if it's not at the new event page, we'll make sure that it's there so that you can find that on Amazon.
Sure. So this is called Death is a Period Occurring at the End of a Sentence. You are dying. I reviewed the CAT scans, spoken to the specialists, and studied the labs. There are many possible treatments that could be offered, but I fear they will not stem the course of all that is happening already. The tumor is too advanced, the metastases too malignant. I know that there are many questions about chemotherapy, radiation, and feeding tubes. I would caution you to think of death as the inevitable endpoint. There are many things we can do between now and that endpoint. Some will increase your life expectancy, and some will cause pain and discomfort. The trick is to decide what is more important to you, quantity or quality. Many life-prolonging treatments come at a price. Chemotherapy causes nausea and fatigue, radiation has many untoward effects, feeding tubes get infected and accidentally pulled out. You must feel like all hope is gone, but I want you to know that I have great hope. Let me explain. In my experience, every person, young and old, healthy and diseased, wakes up each morning with a plan for the day. Although sometimes those plans are unreachable, you will not be able to make that last trip to Florida, others are quite possible. You should expect to spend each day with your pain controlled and in a safe environs. My goal is for you to experience pleasure, no matter how small. This I can do for you. I do not know when you're going to die. Doctors are poor at estimating such things, but I would like to help you to focus on the life occurring around you each day. Death is a period at the end of a sentence, not a parenthesis or quotation mark. Although my role in curing is over, I will by no means abandon you. In fact, I will be even more engaged. You need me more now than you did when I was treating your high blood pressure and colds. We will travel this road together, and on that day when death finally comes, you will be cared for, likely pain-free, and surrounded by love.
Wow. There's so much there. So much there, Jordan. Thank you for that. And that is in your book, In My Humble Opinion, or I Am Your Doctor, In My Humble Opinion. That's in this most recent release.
There you go.
Good. I'm glad that you brought the book so that we could show you that. Wow. As I say, that's so rich. It's so full. So many places to start on that. But one of the places I wanted to get to was, wow, you know, a doctor talking about hope. And what we know about hope is in the pathway to death, that's a changing focus of hope, and that might be changing every day, but it doesn't mean, as you said, that it's not there. And that's really something. I think most people don't get that kind of conversation. So let's back up a little bit, just so that we can kind of bring this all in perspective. When I talked to you a while back when we were talking about the show and seeing if there was any way that we could collaborate, you shared with me that you were probably one of the few students in medical school who began volunteering at a hospice. Tell us about that.
Well, actually, my first medical experience was in a hospice. It happened a week or two after I started medical school. And you and I have also talked about the fact that, you know, my father died when I was very young. So the death and dying process always was something that I dealt with both as a child and figured that I would deal with as I entered my career. So when I started medical school, it just seemed like the natural place to start, a place where I could practice being with people at the difficult times before I actually understood the medicine or physiologically what was happening. And it was a really invaluable experience because as we all know about hospice volunteers and hospice nurses and hospice doctors, everyone has a role to play, and often the care you give to people isn't necessarily always have to be based on knowledge. I didn't have to know physiologically what was happening to my patients to be there for them. And that was something that a first-year medical student was very capable of doing, of lending an ear, of talking, of holding a hand, and of being present when people need you. And it was really a nice way to begin my clinical career because I figured if I could figure that part out, I would eventually learn the medicine. I'd eventually learn about the diagnoses and how I treat them and the diseases that I'll see. So I felt like I was getting an early jump on how to help and care for people.
And it's so nice.
Go ahead, Missy, go ahead.
Well, it's so nice to see that as you're advancing in your career, that's still front and center, and really, as a doctor, I think that is the part that many of us maybe secretly long for, because when we go to the doctor, we want to know what's wrong, we want to know the specifics. But I think underneath it all, our heart, saying the old culture say that our heart brain or our heart knowing is much stronger and bigger and more important than our mind and mental and reasoning. That perhaps our heart is really calling out for the love and attention and care that you noticed as a first-year medical student, and noticed that as a human being you're able to give, and then you're continuing this in your practice. Yeah, I love that. And what I also noticed too is that in your excerpt, was when you read that, I think a lot of doctors are afraid of death because it's just not common to talk about it. It's not a cultural norm that we talk about it as we would other subjects. It has this dark cloud surrounding it. And I really love that you just put it on the table. You're pretty much you're going to die, as we all will, but here's what we can do to make your exit more pleasant. And I find this so much more relieving if I imagine myself as a patient of someone who's going to die shortly, than to say, well, we can do this and this and this, all these things that we tend to do to prolong it and to avoid it. So I appreciate that. And I'm wondering how your patients react to this. Speak to that.
You know what? It's really a process, and it depends on the patient. It depends where they are in the process. One thing I learned early in working with a hospice early on, and that I've carried with me, is you have to kind of meet people where they are. You can't bring them to where you are. So my goal is to offer them the information and to support them, but not necessarily to convince them to, quote unquote, come to my side or believe the way I do. My goal is to arm them with all the information. What also was a big part of writing that piece is that if you've ever been in these situations before, a doctor walks in solemnly and says, "I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do." And I can't imagine how horrible it is for someone to say that to you, not because you're dying per se, but because when you say there's nothing we can do, what that almost automatically means is I'm abandoning you, and I have nothing more to offer. And what I found is that when people get to this place where medical treatment becomes more harmful than good, when the chemotherapy isn't going to help anymore, and the diuretics for the heart failure and the inhalers for the emphysema aren't doing any good, this is actually a time where I think we can do a huge amount to help with and be with people. Again, we just change our focus on where we're putting our energies. So to me, I think it's always been it's been of great importance to let my patients know that when other people are telling them there's nothing we can do, what they're really saying is we can't actively remove that tumor anymore, but there's still plenty we can do.
That's got to be so comforting, Misty, to your point. And Misty, just want to let you know your audio was a little bit tougher to hear on that and video, so you may want to speak a little bit more clearly, because I want to hear all the great stuff and wisdom that comes out of you. But so yeah, and I would expect that people have varying reactions to this, but I can't imagine that anger would be, well, there may be anger, but in terms of, towards the doctor, when you're sharing with them all of these other possibilities, there's a lot of decision making probably to go on. What do you find people tend to go at this point? Do they seek other doctors? Do they continue to try and seek the next thing? Or is there kind of an innate understanding with them as well?
Again, it also depends on the patient. So many of the patients that I take care of in my practice, I've been taking care of for years. So we have that experience of me being there when they were diagnosed, and me being there when they went to the oncologist and got the chemotherapy, and me being there seeing them in the hospital when they had a complication of one thing or another. So for people who I have that relationship to, you take your cues from what they say and how they say it. My goal is to gently give them the information, but also not to shove it down their throat. Now, I've also done work with hospice and palliative care and been a hospice doctor and done hospice consults, and sometimes that can be a little harder because you don't have that immediate interaction with people because you don't know them. But if you sit down and listen to people and first ask what's on their mind and how are they feeling and what do they think is going on without you actually giving any input yet, and then you use that as a springboard to discuss these issues further, I think it can be very helpful. The kind of conversation that I discussed in that piece is one that I would have with someone I knew pretty well. Someone who I had a real relationship with, who I could walk in and say those things as bluntly as that. There are many situations where it takes time, and it happens over many visits, and little pieces of that conversation come out at different times. So it's not one size fits all, and again, a big part of that is we have to meet people where they are, and people show up to us at all parts of the spectrum. So my goal is to study each person, to listen to what they tell me, to take it in, and then to react and interact based on what they come to the table with.
Beautiful. So two thoughts come to mind. One, there you are, kind of in a team approach, but maybe not very organized. So you have a relationship with the patient, but they may have also been seeing an oncologist, a hematologist, or whoever else is involved in their care, and there may be mixed signals between what you're sharing and what the other doctors are sharing. But the beauty of this, I'm gathering, is that you're still taking that cue from that patient, even though there may be some very different information heading, coming out of, say, an oncologist versus what you're saying. Is that correct?
That is correct, and I have the benefit of calling the oncologist and talking to them before I have these conversations. So many times I'll go see a patient and they'll tell me the oncologist said that things are stable and let's see how it goes in 6 months. And then I'll call the oncologist and they'll say, I think they have days to weeks to live. So I can often take that information, put it together, and then approach the patient and talk to them a little bit more realistically. And depending on the oncologist, some are great about this stuff, but some actually tend to send me patients because it's time to have that conversation and they're not sure yet how. So that's something that, having the team approach, it's very easy for me to get on the phone and call all the parties involved, and the oncologists are much more likely to tell me what they're really thinking. They don't sugarcoat it when I talk to them. So that helps because I can get a more realistic picture. Now, the truth of the matter is I've been in this business long enough. I tend to know. I know a lot of the major cancers. I know what end-stage heart failure and end-stage emphysema look like. I know what end-stage dementia looks like. So I'm lucky enough to have enough experience to have a good idea myself, but I would rarely want to start having these conversations at least until I huddled with the oncologist or the heart doctor or the lung doctor and really got their true input, because while I have quite a bit of knowledge about many fields, they are the experts. They also know the patient, and this is how we make good decisions, hopefully as consensus.
Is that the norm, to have that kind of huddle? I tend to also hear that in some cases that doctors are acting, well-intentioned and in the best interest of the patient, but not necessarily connecting to coordinate the care.
I think care coordination has really fallen off in the last bunch of years. I think doctors nowadays, unfortunately, and I'm one of them too, we're so busy trying to meet the requirements and regulations of the government and the computer and all the other problems that the problem happens that we rarely actually get to be in the same place with each other anymore. Most general doctors like me don't even go to the hospital anymore. So that's where they normally would have these type of huddles. I'm lucky enough that I've built a career in such a way that I have time to do these things. So I don't know if it's the norm anymore. It certainly should be. There are other forces in healthcare right now which have made it quite difficult on people who are generally caring people. But most internists, general doctors, don't really have these conversations anymore. They just would do a hospice consult.
Yeah, that's what I was concerned about. And I guess the second part of that came out of that is, do you find that the patient is ready, and sometimes the parents are not, the family, it could be, a large kid and parents, or a big kid and parents are still involved, or maybe they're not, but the family is, sort of part of this whole decision, kind of like more of a patient-centered family-focused kind of thing to involve them. How does that affect what's going on with the patient and what the choices are?
Yeah. You know, again, it's so variable depending on the family situation. Where I find myself having the most difficulty is when I'm trying to advocate for the patient and the family is not on board. So there are many times when patients come to me and say, I don't want any more chemotherapy, I don't want to go to the hospital anymore. And on the other hand, the minute they get sick and can't make decisions for themselves, the family members swoop in and do all those things they said they didn't want. And that's a very complicated situation. And I really stress with families, especially when patients no longer can make decisions for themselves, whether it be dementia or illness of whatever type it may be, is we need to answer and make decisions not based on what I as the doctor want or even you as the family want. We need to make decisions based on what the patient would want if they could see themselves in this situation when their brain was functioning better and they were able to make decisions. So if mom could see herself 5 years ago, if the mom from 5 years ago could be in the room looking down at the state she's in, well, what decision would she make for herself? So the goal is really, my goal always is to advocate for my patients above and beyond, and then to advocate for families. And sometimes it's not the same thing.
Yeah, I bet you that has its challenges for sure. So you've got to again meet that patient where they are and find out what they want and try to express that. But what you're also talking about is really advanced directives, which is a whole nother show, and advanced planning, so to speak, so that we can really understand what patients want before they're ever in that scenario.
Yeah, I agree. Advanced directives are both great and terrible all at the same time. What's terrible about advanced directives is they're usually just not specific enough. And the reason why is it's easy to say an advanced directive, if after 48 hours there's no likelihood I'll recover, please take me off a breathing machine, and you need 2 doctors to verify such a thing, what a lot of advanced directives say. The problem is there's always some hope. And so what we need is advanced directives that are much more specific. If the chance is that I'll live 5%, do I want to be kept on a ventilator for another day or 2 days or a week? These specifics are hard. So I think everyone needs an advanced directive for general terms, and then I think they really need a good healthcare power of attorney, someone who can make decisions for them, and then I think they need to spend hours, days, weeks, months telling them about really what they want.
Yeah.
So you need both.
And that's a whole nother conversation, being able to begin that conversation among family members so that, so that those are the kinds of wishes that can be heard and understood. But again, as rare as the conversations are that maybe doctors have with their patients, I think that's rare that families are having that as well. And so this is part of the reason why we wanted to have this show, was to get people thinking, talking, figuring, considering, musing about all of the, the possibilities that could happen. And yet you could go crazy with all those possibilities. So somewhere in that whole mix has to be something realistic and, a way for people to begin being pretty comfortable having those conversations in general. So hopefully that's what we're doing, Misty, is starting conversations.
Yeah, and usually if I can get families to talk about it before we're in a crisis situation, even if they haven't had full conversations, a lot of times I can help them tease out what the family member really wants by asking very directed questions. The key is that there was some engagement there in the first place. So we don't have to have it all laid out perfectly, because we're never going to. But a series of informal conversations among loved ones, among who's going to be your power of attorney for healthcare decisions, can just be very helpful and very important. And if you get and have a doctor who can sit and work with you through some of that, it does make decisions easier.
Absolutely. Misty, I was going to ask you, have you had those conversations personally with your loved ones? I know I have. It wasn't easy. You have?
Well, with my mother who recently passed, she was one who didn't want to talk about it. But when I brought it up, she skirted around it, but in her own way, she made it very clear, and very early on, she made it clear. So in her own way, as Jordan says, there's everyone you meet is in their own world and has their own. They're all in a different space. So honoring that space where they're at and meeting them where they're at, I think, is so key, and that's what I did with my mother. And respected where she was at, and that she wasn't ready to talk about it, but in her own way, which was kind of from the side, like a crab. It's difficult with her to approach things face on, but you would often get the answer on the side. So that's how we had our conversation. And with my father, I haven't yet, but he has a new wife now, and it's a very good wife, and I'm feel confident that we have.
Misty, it's a little hard to hear.
Sorry?
It's
Was it difficult to hear me? Okay. But yeah, I think it's about approaching where they're at. And so sometimes it's hard to approach this direct, and I think that's the beauty of what doctors can offer and what Jordan's doing. I'm wondering with people who are resistant, Jordan, do you have any advice for family members or for patients themselves to make this transition into these conversations more easily?
Yeah, I think at some point, so my goal is to treat each of my patients with dignity, and so the big thing is to define what dignity means to each person. So I've had patients before who wanted as much aggressive treatment as possible, and I think at this point in time, how things work in the United States, that's okay, and we've decided that we will accept that, and so my goal is to support them. You know, people tend to make the decisions they feel right or for them at the time. However, when those people eventually get to the place where they're on a ventilator or they're not waking up, and it's clear that any medical treatment will do more harm than good and won't prolong life, then we sit and we talk again to the family and say there's such thing as medical futility. We don't have medical futility laws, unfortunately, in the United States, so doctors have a lot of trouble saying, no, I won't perform that procedure, I won't give that chemotherapy, but there is a point where our treatments become futile, and then at some point I talk to family and say, look, I really believe this is not something we should offer. But as long as the patient can give opinions, I really try to give them as dignified time left that they have, whether I personally agree with their decisions or not.
That's great, and that's hard. That is hard, especially when you see someone you've cared for and been working with for years. But it is the right thing to do. So it's so good to know that you're out there and hopefully being a model for what kind of life care and death care can be like. And I know it's sort of forging a new road. Do you feel like you're out there on your own, or are you finding that there's some support as well?
You know, there is a huge hospice and palliative care community, both on social media, and I happen to be in a place that has a number of really good hospice and palliative care providers. So I think maybe 10 years ago when I first started, I felt a little more on my own. Now I feel like we're doing more and more of this. I've personally been able to start palliative care programs in 2 different nursing homes, actually 3 different nursing homes, and I've been able to help run them, and I see that people are becoming more engaged. The different specialties are starting to understand more the limits of what they can and can't do. And I think public policy is also changing to reflect our better understanding of hospice and palliative care. So I think when you put this all together, I don't feel like I'm fighting the battle alone. In fact, I feel like I'm one of many. And I think that feels good. I mean, that feels like we're really starting to look at what people need, not what we need them to get, but what people truly need.
Right, and that is a really big differentiator. So you're writing, Jordan. In all of this, you have been able to express yourself through the written word. What got you started doing it that way and sharing things with the general public that as I said earlier on your introduction, that most doctors wouldn't normally admit to or want to share. It's very open, it's very raw, and it's very heart-based. I'm loving it and very curious.
So, I've always written. Even as a kid, I used to write poetry, and I always found that when things affected me, I wanted to write about them. But it's a funny story how I actually started writing and blogging and writing more publicly. In the beginning of my career, when I had first come out and was practicing medicine, I also owned a website that sold artwork. I used to like to buy and sell artwork of famous artists and put it up on the internet. And at the time, it was 2005 or 2006, my brother Andrew was big into the blogging world. He was one of the early starters, and he said, you know what, if you have a website and you ever want Google to go to your website, you need to keep on changing your content. He said the easiest way to change your content is connect a blog to your website and write every day. So I did this, and I wrote about artwork, and I wrote about buying and selling artwork, and it bored me to tears. So one day I, looked into my Google browser, and I wrote, medical blogs. And I came across a blog by a guy by the name of Grunt Doc, who is an emergency room physician and was a prolific blogger. And that day I read it, and I said, this is something I want to do. And that very day I started my first medical blog post, which was a blog post about my story, about my father dying when I was a little boy, about that propelling me into the idea of becoming a physician like him, about going through medical school and residency and hitting the one day that in a sense broke me, changed me, because something really bad happened while I was in medical school, in residency, and I felt very responsible, and how that caused me to close up, and how closed I felt for years going out and practicing, and then my son was born and things just changed. I opened up and I felt human again, and I started writing these things, and just the difference in my clinical practice was marked. All of a sudden it was easier to be with patients because I was much more in touch with my own feelings. And so the first thing I knew immediately after I started writing is that I had all this burden, these things that I was carrying that I needed to get out and talk about. And this provided me a way to put my feelings down. Now, why public versus not public, that I don't know. I just feel like, I didn't know then, I know now why. Then it was what it felt right and what I wanted to do. Now I realize that between doctors and patients, there's a real gap in intimacy. Patients come into our office and tell us the most difficult things. And doctors, by training, we're supposed to listen stone-faced and objectively, and then we say nothing back. We say, oh, okay, or we certainly don't tell patients about our lives. Now, I never thought it would be the right thing for a patient to come and tell me about their chest pain and sit there and tell them about how I just had a fight with my mom and something's going wrong. I didn't think that was right, but I thought more in general terms it would be good if physicians could tell some of their stories, to find a way that intimacy could be shared. Again, maybe not on a person-by-person basis, but so that our patients could see us for who we are, which are thinking, feeling individuals who mourn when our patients die, who worry when our patients are doing well. So I really now believe and feel that writing in public helps close that intimacy gap that I think we've been lacking in healthcare all these years.
Wow. Wow, just beautiful. I mean, it could really make me weep because of the experiences that I've had in the medical world. And it's also some of those same experiences that have sent me to more holistic doctors in general because of that intimacy gap that you talked about. Not that there's anything wrong with any kind of doctor, but I obviously felt a need for some kind of connection, I guess you could say, and I tended not to find that as much in traditional medical care. If I had been in Illinois and come to you, that would be a whole different story, I'm sure. And again, you're right, not to share our innermost, darkest secrets. We all have things that are going on in our lives, but to offer a kind of a vulnerability that is it's not weakness. It's kind of like if you've ever watched Dr. Brene Brown's TED Talk and her work on vulnerability and shame. It's not that. It's not about weakness. It's about sharing authentically with another human being. And seriously, that just is beautiful to me.
I think one of the biggest challenges is learning how to be both vulnerable and engaged as a person, but then also know how to be clinical and objective. So, you know, what I often like to say is when a patient's bleeding out in the emergency room, you don't want a doctor who's going to hold your hand, you want a doctor who's going to get in there and stop the bleeding. When you need to be in the operating room, you want a doctor who's technically proficient. But when you're talking about death and dying, or you're talking about the emotional effects of disease, or you're talking about how you had a really bad day, you want someone who can sit there and listen and feel and emote and empathize. And I think that's the real trick and art to being a good physician, is knowing how to do both. And it's something we all struggle with. And different specialties do it differently. Certainly surgeons sometimes get away with being more technically proficient and not empathizing, whereas internists sometimes don't have to worry about their technical proficiency as much and can spend a lot more time holding people's hands and being with them. But I think it's the trick that we're all trying to learn, is how to balance those two forces correctly to give both engaged as well as effective care.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think I have my audio fixed. Does that sound better?
Oh, yes. Yes, it does.
Yeah, okay, good. Good. Yeah, I think the jumping in early and having all the technical problems, I wasn't able to do my little pre-show audio check, so here, we're good now. I just want to give a quick shout out. We don't have comment tracker up today, but we do have a few viewers I'd like to give notice to. Aslin Bloor is a new viewer. Thanks for joining us. Julie Sager Nierenberg, and we're thinking perhaps Julie can jump in for a few minutes here. Julie was instrumental in connecting us with Dr. Jordan Grumet, so that's a possibility. We might be able to bring her in for a few minutes. Jamal Assi is a dedicated follower. Carolyn Darden, she's been with us for a few shows now. Jim Sharp, Jean Sabri, Roxanne Davenport, and there's a few others here too. So just thanks everyone for watching, and we appreciate your joining this conversation. What do you guys think? Should we try and bring Julie in? We're getting close to the top of the hour. We did have a little bit of a late start, and we do have to touch on our book. We're doing a book club, Jordan, The Death of the Afterlife of Billy Fingers, as part of a death book club. So we're going to spend a few minutes on that before the end of the show. But I'll leave it to you guys to...
Yeah, Misty, if you want to send the link to Julie. I know Julie and Jordan have worked together, so I'd love to get them together. And I want to talk a little bit more while you get, if you could get that link to Julie to join us about his writing and a couple of other things I wanted to ask before we head towards that. So tell us a little bit more about the theme of your blog posts. Also, I know you have another piece that we would love to hear, and then at that point maybe Julie can join us.
So my blog posts run the gamut. Basically, they're everything from about family to about friends to about medical experiences, and I do a lot of talking about healthcare in general and where I think we've gone right and gone wrong. So, you know, I pretty much, the one thing about my blog is it's really whatever's going on in my life at the time. So I can write just about anything. Sometimes I do book reviews. Sometimes I do just whatever comes to mind at the moment.
Whatever comes in and whatever comes out, and you never know what's going to happen. In fact, I was going to ask if, when you were talking about the kind of person you are and the differences between doctors, do you think that that's one of the reasons that you chose internal medicine, is because it offers the kind of outlet that best suits you as a personality, or is that just kind of happenstance?
You know, I always liked the idea of covering and being able to talk about almost any medical problem. So I like the idea of covering almost all fields. I like the idea of being a generalist, someone who is given an undifferentiated puzzle and then can try to come in and put the pieces together. So that to me was always why I went into internal medicine. I'm looking for that other piece as you're talking, because I didn't prepare to read that one, although I can. I just have to find it in my book.
Okay. Okay. And one of the questions, too, do your patients know that you write, and do you engage your patients that way, as far as them knowing that this is kind of like another side of you?
You know, I never tell them per se, but most of them do look me up or find me on the internet. I've been lucky enough to have my pieces appear in a number of places. So most of the time people figure it out or they learn about it, but I would say maybe 25 to 50% of my patients know, the rest don't. I really try to keep those lives separate in the sense that if they go out and find it, that's great. But I try to really spend most of my time in the exam room talking about them.
Gotcha. Gotcha. That makes sense. So what was the name of that other piece while we're waiting for Julie? I think I've found that link for her.
See if I can find it. I apologize. I didn't bookmark it because I didn't think I was going to read it. So let me look and see if I can find it here. Julie would probably know. She's much faster because she helped me put everything together.
And just for the rest of our viewers, Julie Sager-Nuremberg, she's the lady who we had on one of our first or second weeks, I guess, actually maybe the third week, and she is a writer, an editor, a kind of a coach, a writing coach, and certainly was instrumental in helping you, I guess, pull together some of your blog posts, because it was sort of like you had the makings of a book but didn't even put it together at that point, huh?
Yeah, I had a bunch of blog posts. I mean, I have over 600, 700 blog posts, but never had the time or energy to put them together. And she had seen some of my work and approached me, and we decided to collaborate, so she's the editor. I do have that piece pulled up. Would you like me to read it?
Yes, I would love for you to read it.
So this blog post was spurred by the fact that sometimes having advanced directive conversations with people isn't easy. Sometimes they don't want to hear it. Sometimes it's just not what they want to talk about that day while they're in the office. So this is called death and privilege. Right. When I say it's a privilege, I see your eyes go crossed. You think I'm daft. You reason that you are too young to talk about such things, or old but healthy, or that the cancer has spread, but you want to remain optimistic. And I shake my head and think about my father. He never had the luxury. At the age of 40, he left early one morning to round at the hospital and never came back. A small blood vessel burst in his brain, causing irreparable havoc. By the time we arrived, he was connected to all the appropriate machines. Back then, there was no talk of such things as pre-existing wishes. A neurosurgeon, my father's colleague, told us he was gone, and the ventilator was removed. His body quickly caught up with his severely damaged brain. He died. You see, my father passed way before he was afforded the privilege we are discussing today. The privilege of seeing death as a shimmering mirage somewhere in the distant future. The privilege of having a modicum of control over that which you fear the most is a gift. I humbly offer this to you. Please take some time to think about your code status and advanced directives.
Perfect. That perfectly highlights what we were talking about for advanced wishes. You never got that chance to talk with him about that.
No, and he never got that chance to talk about it himself. So I like to remind people that life changes quickly. And although it's an uncomfortable conversation, a conversation we don't want to have, it's actually a privilege. It
absolutely is. And Julie, talking about privileges, it's a privilege to be on with you again. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing well. Thank you very much. I'm so proud of this show because three of my favorite people are on here, and I'm not counting myself as one of those.
And I'm so glad you came on. And again, sorry about all the technical stuff to get started. And I know we've got a lot to finish up in the next 10 minutes just to complete our hour. But how did you guys find each other?
Well,
I'll let you get to that. Yeah.
Okay. Actually, I do read Kevin MD quite a bit. Kevin MD is a very wonderful array of different medical bloggers that are all posted through that website, and Jordan is quite a regular blogger there. And I'm actually can't remember if that's how I read his posts. I think it is, and I went from one to the next, And I approached him about participating in the book that Victoria Brewster and I are putting together about perspectives. And I realized that Jordan has multiple perspectives. He's not just a physician who's everything he describes today, but he as far as death, dying, and the end of life, which is the theme of our book called Journey's End, he's been in so many of the different perspectives. So he will be a part of that book. Once I got hooked on his blog, I couldn't stop. And then I think, Jordan, am I correct? I made a bold move and I approached him about publishing, which he'd already considered. And he just, if I'm right about this, Jordan, he just wanted somebody who would help him do that, and I was so delighted to do that. So that's how we got together.
I had been approached over the years. Multiple people had come to me and said, "Hey, you should put your book together," etc. There was something about Julie that just seemed to fit. She had really, as I get older, I start to look at intention a lot. So when she approached me, she just had a really good intention about her. And I always feel that when I work with her. Everything she does with really, really good intentions. And I really value that, because one thing I've found as I get older is intention is maybe 90% of the game, and the other 10% is hard work. And Julie has given both of those things to my book. She's the editor. It could not have happened without her, and I feel lucky that events happened the way they did.
Thank you so
much.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that is
yeah.
And I agree with you there about intention and about when you find people who are kind of the same ilk, it infuses the activity of the project with a whole nother feeling, and I think it becomes more than the sum of its parts. So that's lovely.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Lovely. So
yeah, really nice to see you again here, Julie.
Thank you for having me. It was a surprise Google bomb, shall we say.
Google is always a surprise. It's keeps it real. Yeah.
It does. Did you want to share anything more, Misty, before we got to Billy Fingers?
I think it's just really fabulous how this all comes together, and how the Google world allows us to connect, and how we connected with Julie, and Julie brought us to Jordan, and how we're all here together, and just hearing this different perspective, Jordan, and it really resonates with the work I do, and why Patty and I first came together. It's because we really want to have those heart connections and get people talking about it without the fear, and there's always going to be some level of fear involved, but the approach of being with the person and being heart-centered and being there for them is so key, and I think that really resonates with all the work that we do. And for our viewers, just being present. What can you do if you have a loved one who's passing, or if it's you? And it's really being in the moment and appreciating each other and where you're at. And it can be pretty simple, I think. It's complicated, yet at the heart of things, it's if we're there with our heart presence, I think that's giving a lot right there, and Jordan spoke beautifully to that, and I know from our interview with Julie, she's a heart-based person as well, so I just feel really blessed to be part of this group and part of these connections, and I'm so looking forward to keeping these connections going, and sending out big blessings to all who are involved and all who are listening. So thanks, everyone.
Wonderful. And Jordan, before we go on to stay with us, because we've got this really cool book to talk about, tell us a little bit more about how we can get your book, how we can get in touch with you. If anybody wants to make connection, how would they do that?
So the book is called I Am Your Doctor, and This Is My Humble Opinion. You can find it on Amazon. Just search Amazon for Jordan Grumet. Usually you can get through to me through my blog, make a comment on one of the posts. You can subscribe, and if you subscribe and you get one of my stories in your email, you can actually reply to it, and it goes directly to my email. So that's another easy way.
And we
Google,
can Google your blog?
You can, and you can Google my name, and you'll find plenty of my writings.
Okay. Very, very good. Thanks again so much for being here. We're going to talk about our Death Book Club now, which we've started, and we're going to share a little bit. Misty, if you want to go ahead and bring that forth.
Oh, there it's muted. So here's Billy. Our book is The Afterlife of Billy Fingers. It's by Annie Kagan, and it's how my bad boy brother proved to me there's life after death. So a little bit different topic than our topic today, but it's all part of it. I think the big part of the fear around death is because we're uncertain of what's on the other side. So this book helps to bring some light, or one perspective, one woman's experience with talking to her brother after he had passed on. So I have an excerpt to read here today. And for last week was kind of funny, because last week I tried to show you the little note that Billy left to his sister, and I think the screen went blank. So there it is. There's a little note, and it's Billy is a bit of a chicken scratcher, so what it says is, "Dear Annie, everyone needs a book dedicated to them. Read between the lines. Love, Billy." And then it kind of goes on, and the result of her conversations with her brother who's passed on is this book. So I'm going to read an excerpt, and this is the first time he connects with her. "The first thing that happens is bliss. At least it was like that in my case. I don't know if it's that way for everyone who dies. As the car hit me, this energy came and sucked me right out of my body into a higher realm. I say higher since I had the feeling of rising up, and suddenly all my pain was gone. I don't remember hovering over my body or looking down on it or anything like that. I guess I was pretty anxious to get out of there. I knew right away I was dead and went with it, more than ready for whatever was waiting. I wasn't aware of traveling at any particular speed. I just felt light and unburdened as the sucking motion drew me up inside a chamber of thick silvery blue lights. People who have near-death experiences sometimes say they went through a tunnel. I'm using the word chamber because a tunnel has sides. But no matter what direction I looked, there was nothing but light for as far as I could see. Maybe the difference is I had a one-way ticket, and theirs was a round trip." So that's a little bit of an introduction. I'm not sure if there's any readers on board with us today, but it's a really fun read, and it's interesting. It's a perspective, one that we don't hear very often. It's the first book I've read in this genre, and I'm enjoying it. Patty, do you have anything to say about your experience with the book?
Yes, and I will mention that Jordan just pinged me and said that he had to run to another appointment. We did start a little bit late, so we did let him go. But I just love this book because it was, again, as you say, a perspective of one woman. And I love the different kinds of, in talking with different people about their beliefs or lack thereof about the afterlife. One was, as a matter of fact, my mother, who used to say, like when you're dead, like splat like a bug on a rug. I was like, okay. It didn't seem to bother her. I just thought, wow, like if I'm going to have to believe something, I'm going to pick a belief that seems a little bit more connected to something big, and that there was a whole point to this human existence, So there's that perspective, and then there's, Annie Kagan's perspective that all of a sudden she's like, he's saying to her, Annie, go get that red notebook I got you. Like he's speaking to her from outside of her head, not a voice in her head. And, I love to put together, I love that word juxtaposition, to juxtapose, splat, you're dead like a bug on a rug, that's it, to this voice coming from the ethers saying, go get the notebook, as if it's just like a regular directive, I just love the craziness of that. And I love the fact that one does not, have to believe it. But it still gives you great insight, or at least maybe a thought that, hey, as I said, if I'm going to have a belief, then, if I'm going to have two thoughts, one's a little less, happy than the other, I'm going to get the better thought. Why not, right? So, did we lose somebody? I don't know. I had a great conversation with myself. Are you in there?
You're doing great.
Oh, good. Okay. Actually, no, you're back in. Oh, I see that Misty got bumped out. I was looking for her. So anyway, she was smiling as she left. There you go. Hopefully she's not flat. Hopefully she just went off to the ether somewhere. I'm telling you, this is the weirdest.
This is it, so, yeah.
Weirdest day. So, had you read that book at all, Julie?
I'm going to get it. I am enticed. I have not done so. I've been kind of stacked up on my reading. But
I bet.
Interestingly, I'm reading another book right now, and it's about a woman who passed and her communication with her various different family members in various different creative ways, but just things that would happen, very odd things, Anyway, so I haven't finished it yet, but I'll be happy to bring that forward to the group later if you're interested in reading that book.
Sure. Well, what I find interesting is, we used to hear very, very little about this topic, and now there's a ton of people, a ton of sort of seemingly regular people who have written about their stories and now have kind of, I can't say it's necessarily mainstream, but we're finding that these stories are popping up. I don't know if that's a change in sort of consciousness happening, that now maybe we're more ready to hear about these things again, but not about belief, just about experience. And here's one. So I find it fascinating. I'm really drawn to that kind of thing, just because I don't know. To me, I'm hoping there's a bigger point than this. This has been a pretty great ride, but I'm ready for another adventure. If I got to go, I want an adventure. So.
I just fully buy into one adventure after another. So
right.
Why not?
Whether we're physical or not.
There you go.
Anyway. Well, Julie, I think it's great. I don't know if Misty's going to be joining us back, but we are kind of coming up to the end of our hour. But I think she's saying that she's not necessarily able to get back on. So I'm going to go ahead and sort of wrap us up. And
thank you for including me. That was really fun. I'm so proud of Jordan.
He's done a great job, and obviously with your help. Julie, tell us again what you do. You are like a writing coach, an editor.
I do. I'm a writer, but I also coach other authors, and I edit material, and I help people get published. I help them promote their work. It just kind of depends on what people would like from me. Sometimes some people want me to set up an accountability system for them, so that they'll do the writing. Yeah. I'll just partner with people at whatever stage they are in their book writing or whatever writing they're working on. Some people don't actually want to publish, but they have other reasons they want to write.
Right. Well, that's wonderful. So obviously you've seen Julie on our show before as a guest. She has a wonderful book, which is called Daddy, This Is It. It's about her memoir and the time she spent with her dying father. It was fabulous and wonderful. So if you have a book in you and you want to find out how to get that out of you, then contact Julie. She'll help you do that. Anyway, thanks again. This is one of your Death Chicks signing off. Patty Burgess with doingdeathdifferently.com. And that was also Misty before she got bumped off into the Google ethers. And that was Misty Lynn from bittersweetblessing.com. And we hope you join us next week. It'll be 3 o'clock Thursdays Eastern. And we'll be telling you what's next. So check it out. Thanks, Julie. Take good care, everybody.
Take care.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Say bye, Misty.
Bye-bye to the Google Gremlins, too.
Take care.